Okay.
What's up? This is Howard Hewett, and you're watching the Break It Down show. Check it out.
Man, we are here with the legendary Howard Hewett. Howard, I have to say as an introduction for our audience who doesn't know, our audience knows you. Everybody knows Howard Hewitt. But I'll say this. For me, I graduated high school in 1987.
Okay.
So that means that in your emergence as an artist, we all
Mhm.
got to know you while I was in high school. And I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
still in high school when the band that made you famous, which was Shalamar,
Hmm.
when Shalamar broke up and you emerged as a solo artist, I was still in high school. So
Hmm.
I have followed your career trajectory. In fact, I remember when I was watching the Arsenio Hall show and Nia Peoples was the guest, and she showed up with a big belt buckle that said Howard, and I
Yeah.
was like, now that's what a Mac does right there. So,
That's funny. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that show. We did the Arsenio Hall show a few times, through the course of his situation, and then Nia also had the Party Machine show,
Party Machine, yeah.
which was produced by Arsenio,
Okay.
and yeah, I remember that real well. Yeah, the first solo album came out in 86, 1986. So
Right.
yeah, in 87 you were in high school in 87, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So I graduated high school in '87. So that means that, when Big Fun came out,
Hmm.
I mean, that music seeped through all of my really teenage
Hmm.
experiences, just meeting girls and going to house parties and going to dances and everything. We were in the thick of Shalamar.
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
what that's why we call it like feel good music.
yeah,
It was feel good music back then, and it was because I came into the group like the what was it, 79 or something like that, and all that. But we call it feel good music. That's why it's lasted, I believe, all these years.
I agree with you. So much, it has lasted so strongly that I ended up. So in my 20s, I was a DJ,
Hmm.
and I DJ'd a wedding for a guy who we went to rival high schools, but we knew of each other.
Hmm.
His whole wedding was themed around For the Lover in You. And I just lost Howard's video.
Okay, hold on, because I'm like, yeah. No, somebody tried to call me.
Okay.
Leon Silvers just tried to call me. So,
Oh, good. We're going to talk
good
about
luck.
him. So this is the Break It Down show. We're doing a segment. You're the first artist on this segment. It's called the Getting the Gig to match I have
Hmm.
an upcoming book called Getting the Gig. So you're
Hmm.
the first Getting the Gig artist to appear on the Break It Down show. So
All
we're going
right.
to talk about those things and then weave our conversation around the context of how you got the gig. So I want to go way back to your
Hmm.
upbringing in Akron, Ohio. You were born in
Hmm.
Akron, Ohio, which of course everybody knows. Ohio is the land of the funk.
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
but that's not where you started. And so I want to talk about getting the gig at each of these milestones. The first milestone, of course, and it may seem obvious, but how did you get the gig in the Hewitt Singers? You
Oh,
were
and
the
then
kid brother.
well, that was kind of like a given. You know what I'm saying? Because my mom who was she was a major gospel promoter in the Akron, Cleveland, Canton area.
Okay.
She would bring everybody in from James Cleveland to Albertina Walker and the Caravans when Shirley Caesar was still with them, Pilgrim Jubilees and Five Blind Boys, Alabama, Swan Silvertone, all those guys.
Wow.
And from the time I was a little kid, like 6, 7 years old, she would always she would bring these shows in, and that's when she was developing herself as a gospel promoter. She also had a radio broadcast that was number one in their slot for for like years and years, and she was eventually inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame, the Ohio Radio Hall of Fame. But when she found out that I could hold a note and and my sisters could harmonize. They could hold a note and harmonize and all that. When she found that out, she formed the Hewett Singers, and
Mhm.
she and my dad, my dad was involved, but he was really involved in taking care of the family, to tell the truth. So like that was his gig, and so like but
Hey,
when
somebody
she
got to drive the bus.
I know that, yeah, my dad was worked for the post office for until he retired and stuff. He's always telling me, he says, "Son, you can come here. I can get you on at the post office." When I was like, doing my thing initially out here in California. But so my mom, when she found out we could hold a note and stuff, she put together the Hewitt Singers.
Mhm.
And once we were in shape enough to perform, of course, nepotism was alive and well in our family. So once we were in shape enough to perform, we opened up for all of her shows that she would bring in,
Okay.
and as well as in the summertime when we got out of school, then we would go up and down the Chitlin Circuit. They call it the Chitlin Circuit, up and down the East Coast, Midwest, and all that kind of stuff. The gospel Chitlin Circuit. So, it was fun. I did that from the time I was about 10 years old until I was about 14. You know.
Well, did you have any level of popularity that you had to deal with as a, 10, 11, 12-year old? Was there, I know you went places and you got some adoration from the
Mhm.
audiences. I mean, whether it's the gospel circuit or whatever you're doing, folks are going to admire you for what you're doing when you're doing it well. So
Mhm.
you really adjusted to this because you've had to do it your whole life where people just
Mhm.
poured adoration on you for singing.
Yeah, I mean, that like I said, I started when I was 10 years
Mhm.
old, and you have there's a friend of mine out here now. Her name is April Sutton. Her uncle or one of her relatives was Percy Sutton. That really was instrumental in WBLS, in New York and the whole thing back in the day. But she's from Akron, and she's a dear friend. And like if you watch the unsung episode that they did on me, there's two unsungs. There's one for Shalamar, and then there's one that they did on me.
Mhm.
And April was in that one a lot, doing the little, they ask her questions and the whole thing. But we talk about it all the time. We first met each other when we were 10 years old. She and I are about the same age. And she saw me like in a church called Bethel Baptist, on the east side of Akron. There's Bethel Baptist Church. And, I was there, and they called me up impromptu. I was like 10, 11 years old or something, and came up, and went up and did an impromptu song. And yeah, the group was really, the Hewitt Singers were really, really popular in the in especially in the Ohio area and adjoining states and stuff. So that was like when I went from the gospel situation into the R&B thing when I was 14. That's why there was a lot of talk about that, a lot of fervor about that. I can't believe Charlena let her boy go in and sing the devil's music. You know what I'm saying? So it was a lot of talk about that, a big deal.
Well, how about okay? So then let's transition into getting the gig with the life band. How was that?
Mhm.
Was that
That
what came next?
Yeah, that's why I went. I basically went to that. Well, first I went to this group called Soul Corporation. So let me tell you real quick, sidebar, as far as like Akron is concerned. Akron is it was at that point, especially at that point, was such an amazing place to grow up because it was the rubber capital of the world. Every tire that anybody put on their car basically came from Akron because all the rubber factories were there in Akron.
Yeah.
And so like I was, it was uh, a place that I could explore my music in a safe environment. That back then there wasn't no shooting and no guns and no AR-15s and no, mass shootings and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the worst that we get is somebody, bucking up and fighting.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't, and every once in a while somebody would bring out a knife or something like that, but wasn't any guns. There wasn't all that kind of stuff. So it afforded me and me and my partners in life, which was in life band, which was Marvin Burke, Ricky Parker, Ricky Fletcher, Kevin Talbot, who just passed away a couple days ago, actually, and Eric McCrae and Byron Williams. Byron Williams was our guitar player, and his brother is Walter Williams from the OJs, right?
Okay.
And that, so I met Walter. He came to one of our rehearsals when I was like 15, 16 years old. That's the first time I ever met Walter. And we're going on now to become really good friends, in all these years. But Ohio was a great place to, like I said, explore our music. And so that's why when I first left the gospel situation, I played bass. My brother-in-law taught me how to play bass, but I could never figure out how to play bass, how to play and sing at the same time. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Because
I,
you're not strumming.
I know
You
you're not
are.
strumming. You like in between the groove, the beats, and the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so that's why I look at cats like Sting, and I look at Larry Graham, and I look at all these cats, Stanley Clark. Well,
Yeah.
Stanley doesn't really sing, but he can hum along. But I look at them and like I'm in awe because I know how difficult that could be. So within that first year, I went into the R&B situation like when I was 14, and then that year for about a little less than a year, I was fumbling around with that. And then I had to decide. I said, okay, am I going to be a singer or am I going to be a bass player? Right? Because I couldn't do both at the same time. So,
Yeah. And you like
so I,
me,
I, I put the bass down, you know what I'm
you made the
saying?
right choice.
Yeah. And it then that's when we formed Life Band. We spelled it Lyfe, Life Band and Show. So Life Jennings wasn't the first cat to do that. We did that back in 70, in the 70s. Like when I was 15, it was 1970, you know what I'm saying? So we started the whole thing. And when I first went from gospel into the R&B thing, like I said, there was a big fervor, around Akron, and like those old church biddies and stuff. I'm, oh, I can't believe he's going to Charlie and letting him go into the devil's music and the whole thing. And it was she, like I said, my mom had a radio broadcast that came on every Sunday morning, and they used to call her the lady with the golden voice, which her talking voice was beautiful. She had a great talking voice, but she couldn't hold a note in a bucket. She was like she was not a singer at all, So, but I tuned in one morning. I had the radio. Remember, I had the radio by my bed, and I turned on her radio broadcast. She would come on at 7:30, somewhere around there in the morning, and she starts talking. This lady with the golden voice, she starts talking, and then she gives her church announcements and all that kind of stuff. And then she went into this thing. I didn't even know she was going to do this, but she went into this thing. She says, now I need to address something that's been going on and for the last couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and it's about my son, Howard,
Uh-huh.
that's, decided to go into the R&B. I'm paraphrasing what she said, but what she basically said was that, she said the biggest sin that he could ever commit would be not to use the gift that God has given him. And she said, and I know what his father and I have instilled in him through these years. And I know that anything that he does, he's going to honor God. And I support him. His father supports him whole totally 150%. And then she said some more stuff. Then she ended it up with like, and furthermore, if I like it, you all should love it. and that was like, I was like, oh right, okay, cool.
Yes.
So yeah, that was so instrumental, I believe, in me figuring out at an early age how to balance my spirituality and my music.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I had to take everything, I had to take a lot of the things that I had grown up with like, as far as like growing up until my younger brother came, it was just me and my dad that was in the house with that testosterone because it was my mom and my four older sisters, you know what I'm saying? So I learned at an early age some of the beautiful nuances and sensitivities and emotions of women. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And going through a lot of the stuff that they go through with boyfriends and all that kind of stuff. And so I
Informing your song.
firsthand,
Yeah.
yeah, I firsthand looked at and watched that and saw that, and so it went into my music. It went into the stances that I took through and especially in the early time, as far as like, what am I writing about? What am I gonna write about? What am
Yeah.
I gonna when I write a song, would my sisters be proud of this? Would my mom be proud of this? And so, like, those kind of thoughts and those kind of boundaries, if I must say, went into my early writing. You know.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And informed all of your writing. And that's why I
Mhm.
think we all sort of identified with, well, I was using your songs to chase girls around, but the girls
Uh,
was because you were singing about things that were heart
yeah,
centered, not
yeah.
just, superficial. So, okay, life band. Now, I know that you were at some point as a kid, you had visited your cousin in California and
Mhm.
that you had vowed to get back out there, and you ended up back out there when you were about 20, 21, around there.
20, 20 years old. Yeah. Yeah. We
Okay.
went out initially when I was 8 years old. My dad piled all of us in this wood sided station wagon. It had the wood on the side, just like what is it, vacation Chevy Chase had the wood sided station wagon. So he put me and my sisters, my four sisters, and by that time my brother was there. He's like 3 years younger than I am, and today's actually his birthday. So shout out, Jeff, happy birthday! I'll call you when I get done. But he's 3 years younger than me, and all my sisters, like I said, so he piled all of us in the car, my mom and his sister, my aunt Ida, God rest her soul. She's passed away since then. But yeah, my dad piled all of us in the car, and we took a cross country trip, from Ohio to California. And we stayed when we got to California. When we got to LA, I think we stayed and visited my uncle. Is my uncle, my mom's brother, Uncle Joe, and we visited him for about 10 days. And I remember everything about that whole thing. I remember the palm trees. I remember the 110 freeway that we were that my dad, the little freeway out here. Well, that's what we kind of call it. I remember the planes. He lived in Inglewood, so I remember the planes going over the house and the whole thing. I remembered everything. And then after 10 days, we got back in the car, went, cross country. But from that point on, man, I said, I'm going to live in California. I'm going to live
Okay.
in California. And it wasn't until I
That was
got out here, till
1973, about
76, actually.
76.
I was, I was,
76.
I was, yes, I got out here in 76. I was 20. And man, my cousin picked me up at the airport. And from that point on, it
Okay,
was
cousin.
like for about 9 months or so, it was me and my cousin, right? And we were hanging, man. When I see him to this day, he lives out here in Huntington Beach. But whenever I see him, we have to laugh for about 10 minutes before we can have a decent conversation because we start remembering all the crazy stuff that we did during that 8, 9, 10 months that we stayed at at my uncle's apartment. He had a 1 bedroom apartment at that time, and we slept on the. I had the small couch and my cousin had the bigger couch because he was taller than me, and we had actually we had a ball, man. We had so much fun. But during that time, we both helped put together this group called Beverly Hills. It was down at the Mavericks Flat. John Daniels and Alonzo Daniels, his brother. Mavericks Flat was like this.
Slow down just a minute, because
Okay.
when you talk about getting the gig, you came out here and you created the gig, and that I don't want to fly past that, because I want people to recognize that you came out here and it wasn't that you auditioned for something; it was that you put something together and you had a situation that you created for yourself. So talk about Mavericks Flat and what that was, because that was a unique sort of situation.
Yeah, Mavericks Flat. If anybody really knows, it's like an historical place here. In fact, the building was made into an historical landmark, so they can never really tear that whole thing down. But when I got out here, about a month or so, about a little more than a month or so, there was a group that came out here that was from Akron, that came out here about a year or so before I did. And back at home, back in Akron, Life Band, my band, were like their proteges, and it was because everything they did, we were like, and they were about 4 or 5, 6 years, the members of the group about 4 or 5, 6 years older than us, than my band. And they had a keyboard player. The name of the group was called Revelation Funk, right? And they had a keyboard player in there that played keyboards and sang background because he didn't consider himself a lead singer. And his name was James Ingram. Okay. All right. He didn't consider himself a lead singer. And the guy that they had as lead singer was this cat Bernard Lawson, who to this day when James was alive, we would always talk about it, and like he said, to this day could sing me and James out this door, because he was, serious. Bernard Lawson, going from that natural into the false and stuff, he was, fluid with all that stuff.
No transition, huh? Just right into
Yeah,
it.
just boom right into it, and huh?
Is he still alive?
Oh yeah, Bernard is still alive. He never came. Bernard never came out here, because when Revelation Funk left to come out here, the Lord called him back to church, which was really a good thing. So, and he's a pastor now. He's a pastor in Akron. Still singing, still sounds great, still sounds amazing. And so so James was like, when I got out, by the time I got out here, Revelation Funk had broken up. And some of the guys went back to Akron. Some guys stayed out here. James stayed out here. The drummer Dap, who just recently passed away, he stayed out here. And the bass player T. Tucker, stayed out here as well. And a couple of the other cats too, but I can't remember. But so when I got out here, after I was out here for about a month or so, I guess, I got in touch with T, the bass player, right? And he said, "Oh man," he said, I called him. I said, "Man, I'm in town, blah 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 blah." And he says, "Man, I'm rehearsing with this group called the Love Machine, and there's 7 ladies, Kathleen Bradley, Miss what was her name, Miss Johnson or Miss whatever Parker, whatever, in Friday, yeah." That was watering her grass with the Daisy Dukes on and all that. That was Kathleen. Yeah, that's Kathleen Bradley, right? She was one of the first black models on The Price is Right as well. But before all that, before Miss Johnson, Miss Parker, whatever her name, before Friday, before Price is Right, she was with a group called the Love Machine, and it was her and 6 other ladies. Wow. Beautiful. Just beautiful ladies. And this is and they were rehearsing because they were getting ready to do an audition that night for Tom Jones, because they originally went and opened up the show. But Mavericks was also a booking agency called Maverick International. And so all of their bookings were overseas, everything. But they had groups there that formed. Ralph Johnson, from Earth, Wind and Fire.
Mhm.
He was with one of the groups at Mavericks initially before he joined Earth, Wind and Fire. You could look out in the audience, during on the course of a weekend. You see Lionel Richie out there, you see Shaka out there, you see Richard Pryor out there in the audience. Everybody used to come down to Mavericks, right? And so when I called T, he said, "Man, you can come down. We're rehearsing at this place called Mavericks Flat. Come on down, blah, blah, blah. Be good to see you." So me and my cousin went down there. And we're sitting there watching. We're just mesmerized because these ladies were beautiful, man. And like, and they're doing their thing and all that.
Oh boy, somebody called Howard. So when he gets a phone call, he drops out.
Sorry. Maybe I should put my airplane mode on so nobody. Well, it might cut them.
Yeah.
So like, okay, yeah, I'm like, I can't see. I'm okay, but you can see me, right?
Yes.
You can
Yes.
see. So we go down there and we're sitting there watching the rehearsal. Then John Daniels comes in, and John Daniels was this cat. I mean, this big, the black exploitation movies and stuff back in the day, like Black Shampoo and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. He was the star in Black Shampoo. He was the cat, and and to tell you, to get you a picture of John Daniels' attitude and John Daniels' ego back at that time, as far as that's concerned, was like he had a plaque on his desk that said, "It's hard to be humble when you're as great as I am," right? And I mean, this was the guy. He walks in, this big dude, right, and walks in, and he looks at us like, "Who are these guys?" And then he comes up to us. He says, this is a closed rehearsal. We can't let." And when he said that, the girls were like, "No, no, please let him stay," right? So we stayed for the rehearsal, and then after, and after the rehearsal, me, John, and my cousin Michael, we started talking, and John said, I want to put together a show group, a really classy show group. He said, and I want to call it Beverly Hills. And we started talking about it, and fast forward, we formed this group called Beverly Hills. It was me, my cousin, this girl, Roberta Patterson, Gwen Briscoe, and Deanna. I forget Deanna's last name, but we formed this group. We had a 7-piece band, and like we rehearsed and hired and fired people for about a little less than a year. And I quit one time. They fired my cousin, right, for some, I forget what he what happened. And because he was my cousin, that family, I quit. You fired my cousin, I quit too. Then after a couple of weeks, I'm sitting there, why did I quit? I didn't do nothing. Why did I quit? So they called me back, and we started talking. I went back to the group and the whole thing. So the other stuff during the course of putting the group together, but that's a whole nother story. But then finally we were in shape enough to tour. And our
It took
first
almost
gig,
a year.
huh?
It took almost a year to get you in tour shape.
It took a little less than a year. Like I said, we were hiring fire people.
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever we had a show that we wanted to try out on an audience, we would play at Mavericks Flat like that Friday and Saturday. You know what I'm saying? So, which was a good training ground, a great, great training ground, because you had so many people in the audience
Yes.
that were doing their thing.
Yeah.
Earth, Wind and Fire, Commodores, Shaka Khan, Rufus, all that kind of stuff. They're doing their thing, and the people that weren't doing their thing, thought that they were doing their thing, and
Yeah.
all the people from Soul Train, the Soul Train dancers and stuff. Everybody used to come down to Mavericks on the weekend, and that's when I first met Jeffrey and Jody before Shalamar even existed. You know what I
Okay.
mean? So
Yeah, even before
so
they had Shalamar.
yeah, they didn't even have Shalamar didn't exist, at
Yeah.
that
The
time.
first one too,
So
Mr. Flats didn't have they didn't serve alcohol. It wasn't a bar.
no,
So
sir.
you
They
people who
didn't
weren't
serve any alcohol. Is either they just didn't serve it, or he didn't have a liquor license. I don't know what the case was, but they didn't serve any alcohol. There was a little fruit smoothie bar in the back of the club where they made these drinks, these fruit smoothie drinks and stuff. But
in the
nobody
70s.
complained. Nobody was, no, it's you just didn't drink in
Yeah.
when you went into Mavericks and stuff. So like, but we put the group together, like I said, hired and fired people, and then we were in shape enough to tour.
Mhm.
And our first gig was in Helsinki, Finland. It was around December of '77, because we went from Helsinki to Geneva, Switzerland, and it was in Geneva, Switzerland. We were there for New Year's Eve. I brought 1978 in Geneva, Switzerland. I'm like about what, 21 or something, 22, something like that. About 21, I think, by that time. And just like and then we went from there to Benidorm, Spain, Saint Tropez, France, Singapore. We went all over the place, man. I
Already
was making
traveling the world.
Yeah, I was making 250 a week, and then we
Yes.
were over there. We were over there for about 9 months the first time.
Yeah.
I'm making 250 a week, and then we came home for about a month,
Okay.
and a little month, about 4 or 5 weeks or so, and then we went back over. And when we went back over, I got a raise. I was making 300 a week,
Yeah.
so like, but we stayed over that time for about 3 months,
It's
4 months.
amazing that they could put a big old show band on the
Yeah.
road in Europe back then.
Yeah. I mean, John Daniels, all his connections and everything were over there. And what
Fantastic.
what was what was crazy, we played Benidorm, we played Benidorm, Spain. Benidorm is like a coastal town. A lot of Brits, a lot of British people go over there, vacation town and stuff. And like there was this club, this huge club that we played. It was called Cap 3000. And I mean, the capacity of this club had to have been like, about 1,500 or something like that, right? And they had this huge, big wooden stage up there, this old wooden stage, which was like amazing. It was great. It was one of those great stages. You a lot of times, I will remember venues by the stages, like Radio City Music Hall has a great stage. The London Palladium has an amazing stage, right? And all that. And I remember this stage. It was a big wooden stage, and so we can and we'll get well. I'm not getting off thing, but when if you look at I played Benidorm, Spain, went blah 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 here, and about 3 years ago, Shalamar, because we tour over in Europe and stuff all there. We have another tour coming up in June, from June to July, coming up in the UK and Europe. But they booked us in Benidorm, Spain,
Mhm.
which was like I said, oh man, I've been to Benidorm. I was 21, 22 years old when I went to Benidorm, and they booked us in Benidorm, and they booked us in that same club,
Come
in
on.
that same club. It was made. It was they had, of course, they did a facelift to it and had redeveloped it and stuff. And but it
It's
was the
big.
same club with the same stage in there, man.
Yes.
I was like, it was like I started out there, went all the way over here, and ended up
Wow. Full
right
circle.
back there, right
Yeah.
back there. And Jeff, when we did the show, Jeff said, "Yeah, yeah, Howard Hewett played this stage, played this club when he was 22 years old." He said the only difference is back then he was doing other people's hits. Now he's
Yeah.
doing his own hits. And like, yeah, I was like, oh man, it was great. But so that's what was so unique about that. And then we like I said, we went back over there for about 3 months, and then we broke up before we left London, actually. And that's when I came back home, came back
Okay.
here.
So you came back home. Now, when you get back home, you already had sort of established yourself in LA. You
Mhm.
know, you had this successful tour, so people knew they could count on you. You know,
Mhm.
to deliver for a band. Uh, what happened next? Did you start doing sessions with Jeffrey Bowen, or what?
hmm I started just kicking around LA, and really kind of established because I had tried, I kind of established before it was establishing situations as far as within the Mavericks flat realm. You know what I'm saying? And then when I got back, I wasn't dealing with Mavericks anymore, and we were still friends, we were still cool, but I started kind of kicking around. I worked with Gwen Gordy short for a short period of time. She was Barry Gordy's sister, and at the time she had this group called High Energy. Had this tune out called "You Can't Turn Me On" right in the middle of turning me, or "Can't Turn Me Off" right in the middle of turning me on. It's like a hit that they had out, and so she was just working with different producers. I worked with her for a minute and never really got anything established, but and then I got this gig to work with Jeffrey Bowen, who is a producer over at Motown. This girl Tammy Gibson, she used to sing with Wonder Love. She came looking for me to do a background session because Jeffrey Bowen was producing an album on Eddie Hazel, the Parliament Funkadelic guitar player.
Yeah.
And so he's producing so Tammy came and got me to do a background session for him. And so we went in, did the background session. Afterwards, he says, "Man," he says, "I love your vocals. This is going to be a self-contained situation." Because back then was about, a lot of bands and all that kind of stuff. He said, because Eddie doesn't sing, so we need vocalists within the group. So it's going to be me, Tammy, this other lady that did the background session with us, and so like he said, I can get you. He said we can work on the contracts. It's going to be under Motown. He said we can work on the contracts and get them right or whatever. He said,
Yeah.
but I can get you into the union tomorrow. I can
Yeah.
get you after, AFTRA,
Yeah.
after
What was you
after
doing?
you. Yeah, he said I can get you into the union tomorrow so you can start making money on these sessions and we'll
Yes.
go from there. So I was like, cool, you know what I'm saying? Because I when I had gotten back from Europe with the Beverly Hills group, I was over there, but I was partying, man. I didn't save no money. I didn't save any money or nothing, man. And so yeah, I was cool. That was cool. I got a gig. So that's when I started working with Jeffrey. And then after working with him for about a couple months or something like that, they started getting a little shaky and stuff. And I called a meeting with Jeffrey Bowen to talk about the um the fact that the checks weren't reflecting the time that we spent in the studio, you know what I mean? And then that's when I got the offer to join Shalamar.
Okay, now let's talk about that because I
Mhm.
know there's a story behind that, and
Oh
I'm
yeah.
really for everybody here. This is a good story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like I said, I called a meeting with Jeffrey Bowen at the Motown building,
But
and that's when
real quick though, was this a Jeffrey Bowen issue or was it a Motown issue? It seemed like a Motown issue, right? Because Motown LA was it seemed a little funky.
yeah, well, all record companies have their thing, man, and like I don't. We used to call it the Motown runaround. You know what I'm saying? They give you the Motown runaround. It's like I said, because when you go in and you do a session, there's a session leader and the
Yep.
whole thing, and they make out all the work forms and stuff for AFTRA, and then they hand those in, and then those are issued to the record company. Then the record company has to issue the checks and stuff. So it was it's kind of getting kind of shaky as far as like what that reflected. You know what I'm saying? So that's when I called the meeting. My lady at the time, who eventually became my first wife and mother of my two older daughters, we were dating at the time, and she worked for Don Cornelius at the Soul Train Dance Studios, right?
Okay.
And so I dropped her off at work and told her, "Hey, I'm going to the Motown building." That's when Motown was on Sunset and Argyle, and they had the top three floors, 17, 16, and 15. And I said, "I'm going to the Motown building and have a meeting with Jeffrey Bowen, blah, 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 blah." Dropped her off at work, went to the Motown building. I'm up there in the office on the 15th floor, and saying, talking, "You guys giving me the Motown runaround, and checks aren't reflecting, blah 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 blah." And in the middle of my whole thing, the phone rang, right? And it was me, Jeffrey Bowen, and his co-producer, which
What
was
phone rang?
the phone in the office
Yeah,
rang.
because you didn't. This was 1979. You didn't have a
Yeah,
cell
they
phone.
no, they're the 70, it was like 78, something like
78.
that. So there weren't no cell phones.
Yeah.
So the office phone rang, right? Angelo Bond answers the phone, and he looks at me. He says, "It's for you," right? And I'm sitting there, and I said, "Well, if it's my lady, tell her I'll call her back when I get done with this meeting, because
Yeah,
that's
she knew
that's
you were there.
yeah, that's the only person I knew I was there." So I said, "If it's my lady, tell her I'll call her back." He said, "Well, it's not a lady, it's a guy." And that was, like I said, that was before cell phones. So when you had a long distance phone call, you could
Back then.
hear the crack, you could hear the crackling and all the distortion on the
Uh-huh.
phone, right? So he said, and he said, it's a guy, and it sounds like it's long distance, right? So I take the phone, and it's Jeffrey Daniel from Shalamar. During the
Okay.
time during the time that I was overseas, they had formed Shalamar, right?
Okay.
And their first single was this single called Uptown Festival, and it
Mhm.
was a bunch of it's a disco format of some Motown hits and all that. And then they went in and they did Take That to the Bank.
Uh-huh.
So they were in the middle of this promotional tour on the East Coast, and them and the guy that sang "Take That to the Bank" got into a thing, whatever. I never really got into it,
Yeah.
and and
That was
he
Gerald Brown.
yeah, and Gerald Brown, right? And he leaves and says, "Well, when y'all see it my way, give me a call, right? When you and Dick Griffey see it my way, give me a call." And he jumps on a plane and leaves them in the in on the East Coast in the middle of this promotional tour. You
Let me
know,
let me let me pump the brakes a little bit. This is Gerald Brown was the previous lead singer of Shalamar, and I just want some people out there are going to hear this and know what his sentiment was when Dick Griffey sees it my way.
right?
Dick Griffey was not famous for seeing it other people's way.
Not at all.
So
Not
if
at
you were
all.
going to lean into, well, I'm going to take off, and this is going to be nothing without me. So when Dick comes around, that
Which
was usually not going to
yeah.
end well.
Yeah, which I can see if you have a situation, as and there's something where you got to make a power play. I
Yeah.
can see making a power play,
Right.
but you got to know when to make that power play. You
Go
know what
for
I'm
it.
saying?
That's it.
Yeah, he only had one song at the time, which
Right.
was a good song,
Yeah.
but he only had one song, so making that power play wasn't a good time. Everything
It's a little
everything
early.
that you do is about timing. You know
Uh-huh.
what I'm saying? And so, like, with Jeffrey and Jody, being familiar with my situation from Mavericks Flat,
Uh-huh.
Jeffrey knew that my lady, my woman at the time, worked for Don Cornelius, so
Okay.
he calls her at the
Okay.
Don Cornelius dance studios to find out where I am, right?
Uh-huh.
And she tells him that I'm at the Motown building having a meeting with Jeffrey Bowen. So he calls down there and gets right into the office, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, I'm on the phone and he said, man, we want to offer you an equal position in the group as lead singer. We blah, 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 blah. He says, you're at the Motown building, right? I said, yeah. He said, where are you? I said, well, I'm on the 15th floor. He said, well, Solar Records are in that same building down on the ninth floor, right? And he said, we've already talked to Dick, and he's waiting for you to get in touch with him to reiterate what I said. So we talked for a minute longer, and I get off the phone, right? And I tell Jeffrey Bowen and Angelo Bond, I tell them, I said, that was the guy from Shalamar. Shalamar's got this, got this tune out called Take That to the Bank that's making some noise and blah, 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 blah. And they're offering me a position in the group, as lead singer. And I remember Angelo Bond, and he'll say, I saw him because he was out of Detroit, and I've seen him a couple of times since then, through the years and stuff when I played Detroit. And he has a whole nother story. He said, man, I knew you were gonna do this. But when I told him and Jeffrey Bowen about, that was Jeffrey Daniel from Shalamar, blah, blah, blah. First thing Angelo said was like, man, Shalamar is nothing but a fly-by-night disco group. They'll never amount to anything. And Solar will never be a Motown. You're at Motown. You're here at Motown.
Right.
And so, like, and then Jeffrey Bowen starts talking, and the way that I am a lot of times, like when stuff is like coming at me, sometimes I'll get quiet. I'll just quiet, and I listen. And I listen to that part, I listen to that part, and then in my head, but the whole time I'm figuring this stuff out and praying, even back then was a big prayer, type. I know the importance and the power of prayer, and sometimes even back then I didn't know exactly because I was still young in the whole thing, but I'm praying in my head, listening to what they say. And so when they got done, I said, well, my car is parked on the street and I need to go put some money in the meter before be, before I get a ticket, right? And I said, I'm gonna go. And I walked, I'll be back. I'll call you. I'll be back. And I walked to the elevator straight down to the ninth floor. you know, got in, went to the lady at the reception desk, and she said, "Oh yeah, Mr. Griffey's waiting for you." Blah 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 blah. I walk in there, and Dick reiterates what Jeff said about equal position in the group. Blah blah blah. And so, like, he said, we need to know, right away because they're in the middle of a promotional tour and we need to know what the deal is. And I told him, I said, he said, are you interested? I said, yeah, I'm interested. I said, but I got to give these people upstairs, a chance to kind of rectify because we had been working together for a couple months and stuff. And one of the things in this business that you find out is as far as more so than any contract you could ever sign, your word, what
Yeah.
you say you're going to do is even more, important a lot of times. Signing agreements are important too, but your word is like, So I said, I'll just give them a chance. I'll call you in the morning, right? So I called them and I said, hey, I'm gonna be home all night. If you want to call and just talk about rectifying this thing and figuring out what we're gonna do, give me a call and we'll talk about it. Nobody calls, right? And so like I called Dick back the next day, which was Saturday morning, right? And I called him and I said, okay, I'm in, I'm good, I'm good, I'm in. And I went over to his house. I watched a videotape of a Shalamar show with Jeffrey, Jody, and Gerald. I watched a videotape, and then afterwards, I'm sitting in this rocking chair, and Dick says, "Well, sing something. Jeffrey and Jody say you're a great singer. Sing something." And I said, well, sing something just right here, a cappella. He said, yeah, sing that. And I said to myself, I said, well, Lord, me and you, right? And I broke in the Feel the Fire by Peebo Bryson. Something that you told me stayed in my head. All that. And just killed it, man. Just killed it. Got through the first verse, half the hook. And like Dick says, okay, I'll be right back. And he stops me. He says, I'll be right back. He goes upstairs, comes back down. He hands me some cash, which is only about $500 or so. But at the time, that was cool. That was good. That was good. He said, here's some cash. Leave it with your old lady. Pay some bills. And he went into the other pocket and he brought out an airline ticket. And this was before 9/11. So that was back in the day when I could ride on your ticket, you could ride on my ticket. You didn't have to have a specific name on the ticket. He said, here's an airline ticket. You got to catch the red eye out tonight and meet Jeffrey and Jody in New Jersey. They had moved from New York to New Jersey. He said, meet Jeffrey and Jody in New Jersey tomorrow morning, which was Sunday morning. And he said, like, you have to rehearse the lip sync and the choreography to take that to the bank. He said, because Monday you got a TV show to do.
Oh boy.
And that's how the whole thing went down. It was like Friday I got the offer. Saturday I did maybe a little lightweight audition. Saturday night I was on the red eye. Sunday we rehearsed all day. Monday we did this pseudo Soul Train dance thing in Patterson, New Jersey. And
Wow.
that was, and then we continued on and finished out the promotional tour. And then we came back here to LA and started working on a Big Fun album.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that Big Fun album, boy, that was stacked up full of hits.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was Solar Records that was Sound of Los Angeles Records for our viewers. And man, that was a powerhouse label at the time.
Mhm.
I mean, you guys had even The Deal, The Whispers, Shalamar, Climax,
Lakeside,
Dynasty. Yeah.
Dynasty, Carrie Lucas,
Lucas.
yeah, and I mean, just every time, during Solar's reign, as you might say, it wasn't unusual to see, to look at the Billboard charts and see, the top five songs on the Billboard charts
Yeah.
from Solar. It was,
Right.
it was an amazing time, and we were to be on the ground floor of that, was amazing as well.
Well, we got a couple mutual friends, and my big brother, like you had James Ingram. I had my big brother was the drummer in Collage. Uh,
Okay, okay,
yeah, Richie Aguan. We
yeah.
we had breakfast the other day. So I,
Hmm.
still see him, and he tells me all kinds of stories about back then, and I
Hmm.
know he's at the Solar family, still kind of stays in touch, and he's played with you in the last couple years. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. I remember him, and yeah, the we've stayed. Everybody has kind of stayed in touch. We're losing people. We just lost Dana Myers not long ago. Dana and I, we wrote For the Lover and You together. But that's that season. That's the season, man. That's the season that we're in.
it's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Yeah, so when I was in my 20s, I DJ'd a wedding of a guy who went to rival high school. His name was Alex Belagrici. and
Mhm.
his wedding was the whole theme of the wedding was for the lover and you,
Oh,
and
okay.
everything that we
Okay.
did. So that's kind of like, when I approached this conversation, I was like, man,
Mhm.
that's Howard Hewitt. Was You have provided really the soundtrack of my formative years in music, which we know in
Mhm.
high school is sort of when the cement dries around your musical foundation, you know.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that was my musical foundation is chock full of, of
Mhm.
stuff that you've given us, and all of that history. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
thank
And
you.
thank you also for remembering all these names, because going through all these gigs that you've gotten, and now we're just now hitting we're coming up on an hour with you, and I appreciate all of this time,
Yeah.
but we're just coming up on your solo career, and
Yeah.
you've remembered practically everybody's name all the way through this whole journey.
Well, I'm looking. I'm through my procrastination. you know, I'm writing a book. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying? So I'm really I've been really the past like year or so been really adamant about getting timelines together and the
Oh,
whole thing, and like how, as far as like second time around, when second time around came was released,
yeah.
like they would say, it was in 78, but I remember it in 79 because we released it towards the end of 78, and it really didn't start
Come
screaming up
alive.
the charts
Yeah.
until a couple months later. That was back in the day when, everybody did remakes, they would remixes rather. They
Yeah.
would do remixes of everything. And so once they did the remix of second time around, that's when it just took off. And so, like, yeah, I'm trying to remember all these, putting together all these things all the way back in Ohio, all the way up to, up to now, So
Yeah.
it's like it's interesting. It's been, thank God, it is an interesting journey,
Yeah. Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad you've been in the notebook, because it sure came in handy today.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's talk about your solo career when things, kind of came apart with Shalamar. Uh,
Mhm.
you did not stay with Solar Records.
Yeah, it was because Jeffrey and Jody split. I think it was like in 83 or something like that.
Huh.
And so, at that time, I said to Dick, I said, Jeffrey and Jody like my brother and my sister. I couldn't see anybody else coming into the group at that point. And
Mhm.
so I said, I said, maybe I should just start working on my solo thing, because we had always talked about doing the solo thing, but just
Yeah.
when was always the question. And so, like, but then he says, well, you still got 2.5 years left on this contract. So the Shalimar contract. So, you can either spend it not doing anything, or spend it in court trying to get out of it, or we could do another Shalimar record. And like, I'm not gonna just sit around and do nothing. And like, court, I hate court. Court
Yeah.
is like, court's like throwing dice. You wonder what side of the bed the judge or the whoever got up on that side on, and that's going to determine the outcome of your
Sure.
case. So I avoid court as much as possible. So, like, I said, okay, I'm gonna do another album. And that's when me and Leon brought Mickey Free into the group.
Mhm.
And and then we went around and did this contest around, did about 15 or 20 cities, and in search of the for the girl in Shalimar, and
Right.
then yeah, and then Delisa Davis, it was like a competition,
Yeah.
and this girl Delisa Davis from Nashville won
Right.
that competition. So the three of us started the whole thing, and that's when we went. And then Dancing in the Sheets. When Dancing in the Sheets came about with the
Mhm.
Footloose album, at the time we were like, the group didn't, that was a little bit before I even brought Mickey back into the group. So Jeffrey and Jody were gone. I hadn't brought anybody in the group yet.
Well, really, just you
Yeah, it was just me. And
and Leon.
so, huh?
Yeah, Leon too.
Well, Leon, he was our producer, but he was doing a bunch of other stuff too. And I remember we got a call from Paramount Studios, right?
Mhm.
Paramount Pictures, from this cat Dean Pitchford, right? And Dean Pitchford is the cat that did all the music in Footloose, right? So he called us. He wanted us to do a song. He wanted Shalamar to do a song in the on the soundtrack on the soundtrack of Footloose. So like he invited me and Leon to the studios one afternoon to watch a videotape of the Footloose movie, and they had temporary music in all the slots where the music was going to be.
Right.
And so, like, then afterwards, he explained to us the song that he had written and all that kind of stuff, and he wanted Leon to produce it, and of
Mhm.
course Shalamar to do it, right? So me and Leon, we're walking back to the parking lot afterwards, and we're talking, me and Leon, and I said, well, what do you think? He said, man. He said, I got a lot of stuff on my plate, right now with all the different people that he was producing. He
Yeah,
said, and
Leon Silvers for anybody who's following along. And
yeah, Leon Silvers, right. And then Leon says, and I really don't think it's going to be a big movie.
oh man, oh man,
And so like he said, so I'm a just he thinks he said I think I'm a pass, right? And he said, well, what do you think? I said, well, and I said, I got to be honest, I said, well, I don't think it's going to be that big of a movie either, because what we just saw. And I said, but with the state that the group is in right now, it was just me.
yeah,
I said, with this whole situation, if we're going to carry on, if I'm going to carry on with this, I said, this would be a good look. This would be a good to be a part of a major, because no matter what we thought the movie was going to do at that time, because at that time it was before, but they were getting a major push from Paramount Pictures. You know what
yeah.
I'm
That's a
saying?
full release.
Yeah, so for the group, I said for the group to be for Shalimar to be involved in that whole thing, I think it would be a good thing. So I decided that I was going to do it, right? And then they brought Leon didn't produce Dancing in the Sheets. This cat Bill Woofer produced Dancing in the Sheets. So they brought Bill in. He was a producer out of Solar. And so, we did that, and then it blew up. You know what I'm saying? The whole thing blew up. So that was a good. Dancing in the Sheets is actually the second biggest selling single Shalimar ever had, which
Wow.
was second time around, and then Dancing in the Sheets is
Yeah.
second biggest selling single. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, that was a nice way to transition from because really that was technically speaking, that was a Howard Hewett solo record, even though it was under the billing of Shalamar. And
Shalimar, right, right, right.
then transitioned into your solo career. And I'm going to offer you the opportunity because we've been with you, you had a lot of patience with us in our technical difficulties, and we've been together for an hour. So we can keep talking about this,
Okay.
or we can do a part two when you and we can focus it specifically on your solo career, which
Okay.
actually has been a lot longer than your
Oh
time
yeah.
with Mar too.
Yeah, when you look at Shalimar, the whole Shalimar situation, I came into Shalimar, like I said, the end of '78, and then went into my solo thing in '85. So it was about six, 7 years, about 6 years or so of Shalimar. But since '85 has been the solo career.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that went it because and I'll say this, and then if you want to do a part two, we can do a part two, but it'll
Yeah.
segue into it, which is like because it was like we the I wrote out the contract, You know, it was like, okay, I'm gonna do another solo, another Shalamar album rather. And so like that's when I brought Mickey in, blah blah blah. We did that. I did Dancing in the Sheets and the whole thing. And then released the Heartbreak album. It was the Shalamar. That was the last album I did with Shalamar. And then in '85, that's when I rolled my contract out. So Elektra Records at the time had first rights or refusal, this thing called first rights or refusal on everything that was on Solar.
Wow.
So like in other words, you had to, before you could go to another, get to anybody else, any
Yeah.
other record companies,
Electra
yeah,
had to.
you had to run a deal past Electra, right?
Yeah.
And for some reason it extended even with me riding my contract out. I still had to do that.
Wow.
And so like, you know, I was talking to my attorney, who was this cat, Bob Lieberman at the time. And I said, you know, I said, well, first rights of refusal means that I take a deal to them and then they refuse it, then I could go wherever else I want to go, in any other record company I want to go to. He said, yeah, that's basically what it means. I said, well, why don't we make the deal so ridiculous?
Yes. Yes.
You know, with
They-
the
Yes.
back then it was all about advances. You know, that everybody now you don't even take advance because it's like, you know, yeah, because you find out early that they don't, record companies don't give you anything. Everything is recoup. The more, one of the most important words that you learn when you're doing a record deal is recoup. What
Yeah.
is recouped? What is recoupment? What is recouped from the company? So
Yeah.
like, but back then it was about the advances. You get an advance and you do the record, then you pocket the rest of it, whatever.
Yeah.
So I said, let's make the advance crazy, you know, and then the bumps as well. When you sell this amount of record, it bumps up to whatever percentage, and that amount of records, it bumps up to another percentage. And I
Yeah.
said, let's make the bumps like crazy. In other words, let's do something that's so ridiculous that they won't they
They have
won't
to
want to
stay.
deal with it, right? And
Yeah.
so like we put together, my attorney said, okay, all right, good. So we put together this deal, and he sent it in to Bob Krasnow. Bob Krasnow was head of Electric at that time, and so he calls me a couple of days later. He said, "I just got off the phone with Bob Krasnow," and I said, "Well, you know, what's he say?" Because Electra was the last place I wanted to be, because at
Yeah.
that
You
time,
over there.
yeah, we were. I'm an R&B artist. The
Yeah.
only thing they had over there at the time was the Eagles. You know, I love the Eagles, but that ain't my music. That wasn't my music, and so there were other places that were doing more of a thing, MCA and all those cats. You know,
Polygraph.
that would,
Yeah. You
yeah,
got all over the places.
exactly. There, and so he says, I just got off the phone with Krasner. I said, well, what'd he say? He said, okay, so what else do you want?
I need my own bus. I need a chef.
I'm like, are you serious? So we sweetened it up a little bit more, and like, but as far as the deal is concerned,
Yeah.
it was a great deal, especially for a first time solo artist,
Yeah.
but Electra always, to me, was, I would always kind of equate it to having a 12-cylinder car, got a 12-cylinder car, and you're only riding on 6 cylinders.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, because the pop department never really came to the party during the whole time I was there. There was some crossover play,
Yeah.
but it was
Big
basically on
players.
the,
I mean, they had like Irving Azoff was there, and they had some, like you said, they had horsepower, but just
yeah,
like
on the pop side, but the pop side never. I forget the guy who
never.
was in charge of the situation of the pop department at that time,
Mhm.
and I mean they never came to the party. never
Yeah.
came to the party. So, but the R&B side, the black side, did a hell of a job in making, Howard Hewitt, like a household name in especially in the black community, which was fine with me,
Yeah.
So, but as an artist, you always want, you know, your um your uh, music to be exposed, to the masses, as many people as possible. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, but so then I started, working on the solo album around 85. And before then it was like a craziness crazy. I call it like my Miami experience that I had
Okay.
back in the day. It was
Yeah.
like it's just a misunderstanding between me and the US government. So it was
Wow.
like
I didn't bring that up, but since you did,
you said you weren't going to bring it up.
no, I was not. But you made it out scot free, so
Oh
I'm not
yeah.
sure how much
I mean,
I'm sure you had to spend a
it
lot of money.
well, oh yeah, spent a lot of money, but it was really, that whole thing was really a test and a testament,
Mhm.
to my faith,
Yeah.
to my faith in God, because God, Christ, the Holy Spirit, because I mean, it was those are situations where you realize and you figure out immediately that you really don't have no control over none of that,
Mhm.
nothing. You have no, there's so many loopholes and all this stuff in the laws and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that was, excuse me, that was amazing was that Electra Records, Bob Krasnow, because at the time that whole thing went down, I hadn't even signed my contract yet. You know,
Oh.
we had negotiated it,
Mhm.
but I was down in Miami during Christmas and New Year's vacation, and I was going to sign everything when I got back home. Put everything and sign everything when I got back home, and that's when all that craziness went down.
Yeah.
And it was just a matter of like, but then Bob Krasnow, which I'm thinking, man, this is it. This is it's crazy. I got blah, blah. But then Bob Krasnow said, no, get him home and let's sign the contracts and let him get started on his album. And
Wow.
so that's what we did, and we postponed the whole thing. We postponed all the dates until I got done with the I Commit to Love album. So
Yeah.
the I Commit to Love album, that whole album was done with that whole thing hanging over
Congrats.
my head.
Yeah.
you
You know
know.
what though? I think that like you said, it was a test and a testament, but it was a testament to the fact that you had navigated your career and developed your reputation as a guy who does what he says he's going to do.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they were right by you in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I was so proud because, during the course of that whole thing, it was one of those kind of things where, those cartoons. Sometimes you got the
Devil
angel
on your
on one
shoulder.
shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder,
Man.
and the devil is down, boy, you done messed up now, blah 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 blah, but then the angel is saying, what do you claim to believe in? Where's your faith?
Yeah.
Where is your faith? And
We're
I
home.
had to stand. And there was one point, man, where like I took my Bible. It was late at night. It was during when we finally did the trial and stuff. And at about 2 days into the trial, I actually took late at night. It was, and I actually took my Bible and put it on the floor, and I stood on my Bible and I said, Lord, I am literally standing on your word, and if I can't, these are things that I have no control over. Everything is in your hands right now. And I left it in his hands, and praise God. That's a testament of faith, but then, like I said, that whole I Commit to Love album was done with that whole thing hanging over my head because we kept postponing, the hearings and postponing, and then finally, got everything together.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is that's a powerful place to end this conversation. If we're going to
Yeah.
do a part two concentrated on your solo career, I definitely am excited about doing that. But I can't think of a better way to leave our audience to think about what
Yeah.
it took for you to actually get through that was to literally stand on God's word.
Stand on God's word, man. And that's what has always gotten me from point A to point B to point C, and will get me off all the way through to X, Y, and Z. Thank God, man. I've been so blessed in my career, in this career from the time, and I look at the career from the time I was 10 years old. I take it from 10 years old because, they say, there's two concepts as far as being professional. One concept is when you make your first dollar, you're professional, but I know some people who made $1 and then waited tables for about 10 years and they made another $1. I don't know, if but I look at professional as to when you can sustain yourself, when you're making money to take care of your responsibilities, your family, your bills, everything. So if we take it from the first dollar situation, I'll take it from 10 years old. But if you're taking it from the time you can sustain yourself, I could sustain myself, then I look at 21, 22 years old, somewhere around there. And like, but you look at all that, man, and look at and it's all blessings, you
Yeah.
know. And like a lot of people will say, man, you're so lucky. I said, no, no, I don't deal with luck. Luck lasts as long as you throw the right numbers. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? But blessings last a lifetime.
Yeah.
Gifts from God last a lifetime. And that's the way I look at this. And yeah, I'd love to do a part two, man, because there's a lot in that whole from the time, from the solo situation as well that can really,
Oh,
bless
that's
some
standing
people out
alone
there.
for sure. I also, yeah, and so part two for everybody who's chomping at the bit for it, we're going to talk about your relationships with guys like the late George Duke, Stanley
Yeah.
Clark, all of the folks who kind of you emerged as a solo artist and they became your peers.
Mhm.
And then, even some of the more colorful characters, Joe
Yeah.
Isbell, guys like that.
Wow.
Your career has a lot to offer, man. You got a lot of material in there.
A lot of stuff, man. Thank God, and thank God came through it, with some, some integrity and all that, with a lot of it. That because that's one of the main important things to me is integrity in what I'm doing, how I do it, how I interacted, with people like, like you said, Joe Isgrove, Quincy Jones, you
Mhm.
know, uh, a bunch Joe Sample, a whole bunch of the cats. I would always kind of gravitate, I think, towards the jazz cats because there's so much freedom in jazz as far as like vocally and everything is concerned.
Yeah, and
So yeah,
style. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
we just ran through a list of guys who just have tremendous style, and that's what I think your voice and your presence in the industry has been really has been an expression of style.
yeah, yeah,
So,
definitely. So
and
let me
uh,
know, man.
okay, we'll do it. I just want to tell our audience you've been today enjoying the
Yeah,
fantastic stories of the great Howard Hewitt. I'm going to hit the
thank
stop
you.
button, Howard. Hang in there, and I'll be right back. Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
okay.